Welcome back to the Hardware Unbox podcast for episode 43. We are going to be talking about how bad Windows is, thanks to a bunch of recent testing that Steve has been doing to uncover all the problems relating to Windows updates and Ryzen testing and a little bit of Intel testing, all sorts of mess there. Then a few other news topics to round this thing out. A look at the 105 watt TDP mode, the Ryzen 5 7600 XGD, a few thoughts on those sorts of things, and then a lot of exciting things have been happening in our boring lives, kind of making it not so boring. So yeah, some interesting things there. So yeah, hope you enjoy this one. Let's get into it. Steve, I hear you've had a fun time testing Windows in the last couple of weeks.
Oh, yeah.
You've been sending me all these messages being like, Microsoft, they're the best company in the world. They make such a great operating system that's so consistent. How's that all been going? Just loving Windows?
Yeah, just loving Windows. There's not much more to say, really. No, it's been an interesting experience, and I want to do a lot more testing, but I think at this point in time, I'm just going to wait for the official release for 24H2 and then retest all the CPUs from that point forward. I don't think there's too much point doing that with the update to 23H2 and then potentially having to redo all of that with 24H2. So I think, at this point in time, I'm just going to wait. Hopefully it's not too long, before that gets released. Hopefully that clears a few things up, makes it a bit more consistent, a bit easier to test all of these CPUs, because getting accurate results with the 9700X or really any of the CPUs has been a pain in the backside. But it's something that I've been aware of for a while, but as I said in the video, wasn't quite sure what the problem was, because I can benchmark like the 14900K and come back to that whenever. Obviously, we don't use that for GPU testing, so the Intel test system gets used a lot less, which I think makes it even more obvious that it affects Intel less, because I can come back to that system, run the necessary updates, update the display drivers, all that sort of stuff, and then run the typical sort of benchmarks we run, and the numbers are like, yep, nothing's changed there. That's all pretty consistent. Run-to-run variation is about the most deviation you see with the results there. But then we can put the 7800X 3D in, and then all of a sudden it's like, what's going on with Cyberpunk? Why am I getting 10 FPS less than when I tested this just recently? And it's always been a bit weird. And then you do a fresh install, and the numbers are back to where they were, or you do a fresh install and it's still the same. And then do you conclude, oh, okay, well, they've one of the other updates has changed the performance of Ryzen, whether it's the latest AGESA code or a Windows update or a game update, any manner of things. So it makes it quite confusing, but I have noticed it at times and definitely commented on it in the videos, just saying, look, guys, I know I benchmarked Baldur's Gate 3 with the 700X 3D a month ago. In this particular example, we haven't actually updated the benchmark, because sometimes that happens as well, but it's the same test. I realize it's, 7% slower. I don't know why. Like we've updated quite a few things since then. It's hard to pinpoint what is to blame for that loss of the 7% performance, because obviously some people will look at the data now and look at the data then and say, something's wrong. The 7800X 3D is slower now, especially relative to the Intel CPUs. Why is that? And when you update things, like I said, the BIOS and all that other stuff, it's really hard to pinpoint that. But it seems like inconsistent Ryzen performance on Windows is probably one of the key factors. And then making this whole thing more difficult, I suppose, to diagnose and really put your finger on and work out what's going on, is the fact that some games, no matter, even if it's a dirty install or an old install, no matter what it is, they just give you the same results. So you can do a fresh install, latest chipset drivers, everything updated, and you get within a couple of percent. So there's some games that whatever the issue is that we're seeing, that it's just not that susceptible to that. And to be fair, that is quite a lot of games. So I've seen, there's been so much testing around 24H2 done now, and we've seen some reviewers get the, up to 10% on average. It's kind of like the Zen 5 testing, right? Like there's a bit of a variance there. I've seen a lot of people get between 5 and 10%, but then some people have got between like 1 and 5%. And like the Zen 5 testing, you can. It's really easy to work out in almost all instances why the margins vary, and it's down to the games tested, which again is sort of what we saw with the original Zen 5 reviews. I've seen people say, "Oh, your data wasn't accurate because look, this media outlet's tested it now, and they've only found 3%, not 10% or whatever. Our updated numbers are more like 7% now." But then you go and look at the games they've tested with, and you overlap them with the games that we've tested, and you find that, the margins are about the same, right? So say there's an example where they found 4%, you overlap the games that you can, and you get 4% from our data. So, and a lot of people who are testing this are testing anywhere from 3 games. I think one of the bigger media outlets that I've seen test sort of one of the biggest samples, let's say, of games has been about 7, 8, maybe 9. So it really does depend on the games. And I think even in our 43 game sample, there were 31 of those games. There was 31 examples where we only saw single digit improvements. So the vast majority of games don't see massive gains. I mean, 7, 8, 9%, that's still a pretty substantial, well, it's a huge gain really for an operating system, especially an update to an operating system to make. But, we certainly saw outliers of 20% up to 30% in some of the more broken examples like Gears 5, which there are some big gains there for Intel as well. So that's certainly not a Ryzen specific thing, or it's certainly not just broken on Ryzen. So it seems to be that something in 23H2 breaks Gears 5, some sort of security mitigation or something like that, hurts that game in particular. But yeah, and again, if you remove, of the 43 games, if you remove the top 10, which would leave 33 games, you only get a 4% uplift on average. So all of this testing really does come down to the selection of games, and the fact that only some games see these wild performance changes within 23H2, depending on I don't know what, is also really unusual. People point out it does seem to be a lot of the more demanding Unreal Engine-based games. I've got to look a bit more closely at that. But yeah, Fortnite's a good example. I've tested Fortnite a lot now. I'm very confident in that data. It seems that, like Gears 5, whatever it is that's causing this performance discrepancy is really hitting Fortnite quite hard. And also it comes down to how you test these games as well. So I've seen a lot of people test Hogwarts Legacy, and pretty universally from the results I've seen, there is a performance uplift there. The degree to how much performance you get, again, will vary. I've seen a lot of people, I think we got closer to like 20%, somewhere in the 15 to 20% range. And that's comparing 23H3 to 24, 23H2 to 24H2, not the patch for 23H2. I've said that way too many times, by the way. I've started just saying random things now. But yeah, it comes down like some of the benchmarks I've seen where the margin's more like 5 to 10%. They've got ray tracing enabled, which really makes that game a lot more GPU limited. I know it can increase the CPU load, but we're testing with the high preset without ray tracing, which renders many more frames essentially, or allows you to throughput many more frames. But anyway, there's a whole heap of stuff there. Yeah, I've spent a lot of sleepless nights trying to work out what the hell's going on, and I think at this point in time, I'm just going to wait for 24H2 to be rolled out, and then we'll update all of our CPU data. So that's like, all the relevant Intel stuff, the last few generations of AMD CPUs. We'll probably do some sort of big update. It'll be good to get all that in before the new Intel CPUs, which really aren't that far away. So we're kind of under the pump to get this. And hopefully Microsoft can roll it out in the not too distant future, because I believe it is meant to come sometime this month, later this month, or early October. So not sure.
I believe it's in the release candidate stage. So the operating system's basically finalized. It just hasn't been published to the public, let's update everyone stage. Yeah, I mean, it seems like, and I think this is something that a lot of people have commented on over the years, that the current state of Windows is very sloppy. There's a lot of issues with how Windows has been adding things over the years that haven't really done anything to improve performance, or at least improve the consistency of performance. Obviously, back in, even just recently, you tested Windows 10 versus Windows 11 and found that Windows 10 can often have a performance advantage in games. So obviously, over the years, as Microsoft has tried to add more and more things into Windows, they're running into issues where these things are costing genuine performance. And this has come up how many times we hear about like Linux gaming, gaming can be faster on Linux because it's less bloated or whatever. And this has always been like how much of an impact is that really having? Like when people talk about Windows bloat, what do they mean? Is it like a few percent? Is it costing 10%, 20% of performance? And there's so many like ISOs, distributions you can get that delete a whole bunch of stuff from Windows to try and improve performance. So that's a whole big, I don't know, community of people trying to do that. But I think with this sort of testing, it's really showing how those things can have like surprising performance impacts. And I think what you saw between you just installing it and getting different performance across two different installs points to Microsoft's failure to keep Windows nice and streamlined and optimized. And they certainly need to be looking into that. And maybe they have with 24H2. I'm not sure whether you tested multiple 24H2 installs to see, like, not saying that's testing worth doing because it's a lot of work, but they've got to adjust some of those things. And we've even heard some issues with things like AMD chipset drivers. For example, you move your CPU to a different series, you upgrade, maybe you switch from a non-XRD part to an XRD part, and the chipset drivers don't necessarily give you the full performance if you don't do a full reinstall of the operating system. For example, when you, back in the older days of Zen, moved from Intel to AMD, and there was that whole discussion about you got to reinstall Windows to get the full optimized performance. Now, that shouldn't be a thing, really. There should be a way to switch your processor and platform while keeping the same Windows install and not sacrificing performance. Like that shouldn't be a thing, but it has been a thing for a long time.
Yeah, I'm actually not sure how to fix that, to be perfectly honest. I've tried many things in the past. I've wasted countless hours on it and not able to recover that.
So it's really something that Microsoft has got to get a hold onto. And I think, as we see things like Steam OS for, portable systems getting more and more traction, it's something that they've got to be on top of, because if Steam OS ever becomes like a genuinely viable desktop platform, I feel like there's people using Windows that would be willing to just jump off, and they're just like, they're itching. It's not quite there yet, but they're itching to get something that's not Windows to use as their gaming operating system. And certainly, as people have found, there are situations where using Steam OS or Linux OSs can give you better gaming performance. So, Microsoft, they're a big company. There's many moving parts in, like, they've got so many employees. There's tens of thousands of people that work on Windows, and that creates all sorts of issues. And I've blasted them in the past for garbage, like integrating Copilot and all that stuff that people don't really need. It's like, focus on fixing, the general stability, the performance of the operating system, make it work well first, and then get those features working nicely. There's obviously been many display issues over the years with how it handles HDR and those sorts of things that they could have improved, but it's a very slow moving machine. But I think there's been so much testing on this specific issue with these specific processors that surely Microsoft isn't just ignoring this now. Like, a lot of the people covering hardware are covering Windows, like a Windows update fixing a CPU, which is kind of unheard of, as you've said. So, I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if there were more performance optimizations to be found in Windows by addressing things like this. And you'd think that companies like Intel and AMD would be all over trying to get Windows optimized for their hardware so that they can get these sorts of free performance benefits effectively.
Yeah, it's quite amazing that it's taken this long to get a AMD specific patch that improves performance to, again, we've seen varying degrees, but again, that comes down to the games that are being tested. And there are some pretty wild games. I mean, even AMD themselves have done their internal testing. We've talked a lot about AMD's internal testing over the last few weeks, but they have shown that you're looking at around a 7-8% uplift in a game like Cyberpunk, which at the time seemed like a huge gain and was probably going to be one of the bigger gains. overall, it's one of the more impressive gains, but a lot of people have now reproduced that. Like a lot of people are showing that, yeah, a game like Cyberpunk where a 7-8% performance boost doesn't go unnoticed is quite a substantial gain. That's a real thing, and it's quite amazing that we've been testing. How long has Zen 4 been out for now? And this uplift applies to Zen 4 CPUs. And you've been, I don't know if we go back to an earlier build of Windows 11, people have claimed this is the case, that the performance improves. And look, this is the whole reason why I recently did the Windows 10 versus Windows 11 benchmark, because over the last year or even 2 years, we get regular comments. Test Windows 10, please. I see better performance. I upgraded to Windows 11 and, I did a fresh install and the performance was worse for the games I play. And I rolled back to 10 and much better performance. And sort of, you see those comments, you're like, yeah, well, we've looked into this in Windows 10 and Windows 11 performance. Last we looked was exactly the same, or near enough too. There was a few very minor outliers where you were seeing, I think it was up to 5% or something. So we'd pretty much concluded that Windows 10, Windows 11 performance was the same, but we hadn't revisited it for many years since we sort of did the initial testing. And then leading up to the release of Zen 5, I was seeing so many comments from people that were adamant that Windows 10 provided much better gaming performance for their Ryzen processor. I thought, okay, I'll might as well. We're waiting. Zen 5 got delayed or whatever. We might as well do a bit of testing since we've got fresh data. And yeah, we found some instances where Windows 10 was clearly faster, and I thought, that can't be right. Like, it's not like with all of this testing, I just run some tests, we get some numbers and go, oh, okay, and publish that data. As you've sort of alluded to, like I was going back and forth with you. I was actually trying to get you to do some testing, and then others posted results, and it seemed like it probably wasn't worth wasting your time on this. You had stuff to do already. But yeah, I was going back and forth trying to work out, I was doing a Windows, I think I fresh installed Windows 10 and Windows 11 for that content about 3 or 4 times and swapped back and forth countless times. And yeah, I kept finding that Windows 10 was consistently faster, which shocked me. And then, we published that video. Didn't think too much more of it, really. It wasn't a huge selection of games. It was the ones we were using for the day one review. And there wasn't any insane results. Like there wasn't sort of the stuff we see in Gears 5 and whatnot, because we weren't testing those games. And then, yeah, to get to the point where we are now, it's like, okay, so there's clearly something not that well optimized with 23 H2, especially when looking at Ryzen processors. And again, I will have probably one more video on this subject before we get the official 24H2 release, and that'll be comparing Intel processors. I've got the Core i7-14700K, which I'll be comparing to the Ryzen 7 9700X. And a lot of interesting results there. Definitely some uplifts for Intel as well. And yeah, the sort of how that rejigs the margins between those two CPUs, between the various builds of Windows, is quite interesting. But yeah, because we're seeing a 7% uplift for the 9700X across the 43 games on average, doesn't mean that it's now 7% closer or whatever it is relative to the Intel processors. They also see a gain across all of those games, which closes that margin down. So it's not a pure win, I suppose, for AMD in that sense. It's that the margin is much smaller relative to Intel and what they've gained. But anyway, that video will be on the channel probably later next week, because I think we'll get Space Marines 2 done before then, or Space Marine 2 done before then.
Yeah, I think this shows the importance of software when it comes to these CPU generations and things like that. Like these CPUs, each generation isn't giving us heaps more performance. Like it's pretty typical to see a 10-15% gain. Zen 5 didn't even give us that, but at least for gaming applications. But 10-15%, you're pretty happy with that from a CPU generation. But if you could get an extra 7% performance just from a software optimization, it kind of shows how, a lot more focus should be placed on making software work for the CPUs that have been created. And as we get more and more advanced, architectures, and we saw this when Intel introduced what was it, Alder Lake with the first P core and E core design
Mhm.
that required quite a lot of software optimizations to get that design working nicely. They went for something innovative, and it didn't just work with Windows straight away. It required significant changes, and many games required updates to support that architecture, especially for anti-cheat and the DRM side of things, that those needed fixing. Of course, you could claim DRM's kind of pointless, but it did
Well,
require
hmm.
it did require improvements and changes on the software side of things. And obviously, as you know, AMD as well, trying to find new ways to gain in the architecture side of things. They can't just let Microsoft and Windows stagnate on the software side, not support the new things that the CPUs are trying to do. And even just things like enhanced AVX support. It would be awesome if more apps could leverage things like AVX 512, because then something like Zen 5 would be significantly faster across the board. But if software isn't coming to the party to support those new capabilities, then the CPUs aren't going to be as good as they could be. And so if there's all these like 7% gains, 5% gains, just going from Windows 11 back to Windows 10, giving a gain, if those things are on the table, then yeah, AMD and Intel should be all over those sorts of things to try and make sure that we're not
Mhm.
going backwards over time as people upgrade from 10 to 11 to 1124H2.
Mhm.
I guess you could say, yeah, they're adding in more features to these operating systems. So more features, more security things is going to have some impact on performance. But at the same time, I would like to think that over time, these operating systems should be getting more optimized for modern hardware so
Mhm.
that they run better over time, so that things designed for older CPUs get removed from the operating system and are not supported anymore to make them more streamlined and better supporting the latest stuff, which I'm assuming has implications for laptops as well, where battery life is always a big concern. And if you're running this bloated operating system with unnecessary legacy code in it, yeah, it's no surprise that Apple and MacBooks and those sorts of things can demolish Windows PCs in battery life and efficiency because it's designed more specifically for the hardware that it's made. So, yeah, it'd be interesting to see how that plays out over the next few years. And it's something I think a lot of people are going to be paying closer attention to after
Mhm.
this. What impact are operating system upgrades having on CPUs? Is there optimization to be had there? And yeah, I imagine you and other reviewers will be testing this as we see, new versions of Windows 11 come out. Because no one tested like 22H2 to 23H2 to see if there were performance issues. Like, no one really thought that was going to be a problem. But I would
Well, we
imagine if
certainly
there's
didn't. I don't know if no one did, but we didn't.
well, that's true. I didn't see any, I think if there were claims that like 23H2 is much slower or faster than 22H2, you would have seen
Yeah,
it blow up as sort of a thing.
it seemed to be a thing that gamers and users noticed and talked about on places like Reddit, but yeah, it wasn't covered by anyone like us or Gamers Nexus or
Mm,
anything like that. And again, it's a tough one because if again, like the 20 of the 43 games, so if we take the 20 least performant games in terms of like what they saw for uplift, if you took that like 20 sample of games, which is a big sample of games, right, that shows that the update or the patch or whatever gives you a 2% bump on average. So again, it's not like this is universally applied to all games. There are some games that were very broken and didn't work that well that it
mm,
fixes. So it's a tough one to tackle, really, because again, you can pick 6 games and see next to no performance uplift. That's pretty easy to do. So it wasn't. But then there's the variation between installs, and it just seems to me like there's been some security vulnerabilities that have been patched over the years, and they can lead to some odd behavior. And again, people are saying even when you disable VBS at the BIOS level, there's still security mitigations at the software level running within Windows that aren't necessarily disabled that are causing these
mm,
inconsistencies in the benchmark numbers. But to what you were talking about, as far as I understand, Windows 11 24H2 is meant to be a major overhaul to Windows, so it deals with a lot of the things we're talking about, which probably isn't surprising that we're seeing some
mm.
of these things like the performance in Gears 5 and a few other titles fixed. So, and then with stuff like AVX, that's really difficult. You've sort of got to implement those features, and then it takes forever before it's supported in games, because it depends on how the backwards support works for that.
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
Because, it has to become a mainstream feature, and the CPUs that don't have it are no longer relevant. So people wouldn't really be using them.
And you see some games come out that mandate AVX support, and you still get people being like, oh my God, why have they done this? Why isn't there like a backwards path for my ancient CPU from 15 years ago that doesn't support like AVX2 or something? I think there was it one of the Watch Dogs games or one Ubisoft? I think it was some
it's Assassin's
Ubisoft title.
Creed. Yeah, I think one of the Assassin's Creed games did it. But, I mean, if you're making do with old hardware and you don't feel the need to upgrade, I mean, more power to you, really. You don't want to be forced into having to do it for, those reasons. But if they are resulting in tangible performance improvements, and it's like, well, they're not doing this just to make you spend more money. It's been a thing that's been in the works for like 5, 6, 7 years, and now it's resulting in quite good performance improvements. So
yeah, and I think the security angle is a good one as well, because usually when security patches and updates are released, they're trying to do it pretty quickly because they're trying to prevent people from running into hacks and attacks and vulnerabilities. So a lot of those patches and things are designed with just fixing the problem quickly first and foremost, with little consideration for making it a super optimized fix from a performance standpoint. And over time, as you get more and more of those patches and fixes being added into operating systems to counter all the various different vulnerabilities that have been discovered, you're probably going to get a solution where it's kind of just hacked together a little bit. Like they've just put some Band-Aids over cracks and gone, let's hope for the best there. And then, it takes time to go through, look at those things, figure out, can we do this in a better, more streamlined method that isn't, costing 5% performance or 2% performance every time a patch needs to be implemented, because they're trying to just slam that thing out before it becomes a big issue. So, those are not ideal situations to be in for an operating system creator that has to manage all these different things. How do we add in features without costing performance? How do we improve the operating system? How much legacy code can we remove while still making Windows work? And then how do we patch all these things as quickly as possible and not create, major issues with the operating system? Obviously, that's a big challenge. And I think that, hopefully 24H2 will go through and improve a lot of these things. And certainly from your testing that you've done, at least with the preview builds, the release candidate sort of things, the performance looks a lot more consistent, a lot more acceptable. There's not a lot of situations where performance goes backwards, which you really wouldn't want to have seen. So hopefully what you've seen from 24H2 will be what gamers will see when they upgrade. Hopefully it doesn't require like a full install or something. People can just do a nice seamless upgrade and get these performance benefits. But at least from that standpoint, like it does look like 24H2 is a better version of Windows in that area. So we'll have to wait and see how that goes, I guess, for the final version.
Yeah, that's right. I haven't done a huge amount of 24H2, like clean install after clean install, but I have done a few, and the results seem very or have been so far very consistent. And as I noted in the video, the most recent version is the thing that I noticed the most with 24H2 and the patch for 23H2 is that it really dialed in that run-to-run variance in a few of the titles like Gears 5, Rainbow Six Siege, especially those ones where you're using the canned benchmark. Rainbow Six Siege in particular, prior to the patch, with Ryzen CPUs, and I have seen this with Intel a bit as well, particularly with Intel, the first run is much higher than the runs that come after it, or maybe much higher. It's a bit higher. So if you take like a 6-run average, it's not as good as, it's generally lower than what you'll see from your first run. Whereas the Ryzen CPUs, they can be anywhere. Like the first run can be awful, it can be really good. And that's why for that particular game, because a lot of people still wanted those results, I had to move to the 6-run average to get data that was, much more accurate than a 3-run average anyway. So I don't know what sort of average you'd want to go to get it very accurate, but I got to 6 because that seemed to level it out. Watch Dogs Legion is another game, and again, the patch did help with that as well. Watch Dogs Legion is a game where the first run on the built-in benchmark is inflated. I'm not sure why. Normally, it's the other way. Once the canned benchmark gets cached, you'll see an improved improved performance. But at least I'm not sure if other people are seeing this, but I'm seeing it very consistently. Fight Watchdog Legion, run the built-in benchmark. I'm using ultra quality settings, 1080p, 40, 90, all that stuff. Run the benchmark, you'll get like 172 FPS first run it again, 165, run it again, 158, and then it sort of starts to level off. So I usually throw out the first benchmark pass there and then take a 6-run average. So if you're wondering if you happen to have a 4090 and a 7800X 3D, for example, or any of the CPUs we're testing, and your results are higher than ours, that's probably why. So try doing a 6-run average and see. I'm pretty certain you'll get a lower result than you will off the first run. And that's, I guess, another one of the problems with the CAN benchmarks, because I can't think of a single example where benchmarking in-game sort of results in that weird, either heavily inflated one way or the other that you see with the CAN benchmarks. Yeah, that's a whole separate thing, Tim.
Yeah, it used to be a thing with laptop testing where you had to play the game enough to get to thermally soak the laptop, because they start off by running at really high frequencies at low temperatures, and then as it heats up, performance drops. So you always had to, at least I had to back when I was doing all of that testing, pretty consistently throw out like the first couple of benchmark runs, or just run around in the game a little bit just to heat things up. But obviously on desktops, that's not too much of an issue. But yeah, I remember that back in the day being a problem. I want to move on and talk about a feature that's come to Zen 5 motherboards, or at least X670 motherboards, and just get your quick thoughts on this. This is a new optional 105 watt TDP mode that's been introduced for, I believe, MSI, Gigabyte, and ASUS motherboards at this point, which points to it being an AMD sort of, not really like a, here, we're creating this new feature for everyone, but kind of like just, sliding it out for people to use. It's a 105 watt TDP mode. So if you're running processors like the 9600X and 9700X, by default, they're 65 watts. But there was this whole hoo-ha at launch about how, maybe some performance was being left on the table by these not being 105 watt parts. So there's now a BIOS feature across all those motherboard vendors where you can just go in and enable CTDP to 105 watts. That's what the feature is called in the ASUS BIOS. I believe in the Gigabyte BIOS, it's called something very similar. TDP to 105 watts, it's either enable or disable sort of setting. So you just turn it on, it effectively changes the TDP to 105 watts and all the associated power limits. Now, the question I have for you is, do you think this is actually something that is going to change anything at all? Like, are you planning on testing it?
The optional 105 watt TDP. You could just call it the pointless 105 watt TDP. Like, it's just a pointless bit of a marketing gimmick, or I don't know, not sure what you want to call it, but it is ultimately pointless. So these CPUs already had PBO, for example, where you could just remove those limits, and we found that it uses a lot more power in certain multi-core workloads like Cinebench. You can improve performance 10, 15, 20% depending on the CPU and configuration. But for gaming, it's a couple of percent. I imagine this will be a percent or two in terms of gaming performance for sacrificing power efficiency. So it's not anything new. But as you said, the reviews came out and there was a huge amount of confusion, largely amongst reviewers, as to how power efficient Zen 5 was, because we were comparing 65 watt parts with 105 watt parts. And it's not, it's TDP watts, mind you. So it's, thermal power. It's not watts, but I just say that, you know what I mean. So you were comparing processors that had a tighter power limit, essentially, with CPUs that didn't. And then you were like, they're more power efficient. Yeah, that's how watts work. So there was all that confusion initially. Then people started to, reviewers remembered that there were 65 watt Zen 4 parts. Those got benchmarked, and then it turned out that Zen 5 wasn't really power efficient at all, or in terms of improvement over Zen 4. In fact, Zen 5, in some instances, used more power than Zen 4 for slightly less performance. But at the end of the day, performance per watt was about the same on Zen 5 as it is Zen 4. So there was, initially people were claiming and led to believe that there was a 40% improvement in power efficiency for Zen 5 over Zen 4, but certainly not the case, especially for gaming. So I think that was where most of the whole 65 watt, 105 watt TDP confusion all came from. And now we have an optional mode, which, I'm not going to bother benchmarking that because we've already tested Zen 5 with PBO. So that really should tell us everything there is to know there. And this isn't a new mode or something that couldn't be achieved previously anyway by just manually configuring the CPU. So it's just it's a one-click, quick and easy 105 watt TDP mode that.
Yeah, it seems like it's designed for people that were concerned about the 65 watt thing potentially limiting performance. So they've just gone, hey, look, if you were really concerned about that for whatever reason, go into your BIOS. You can change the TDP to 105 watts, whatever.
Yeah, or you could have enabled PBO.
Well, you could have, but some people, I guess, didn't want to enable PBO, but didn't want the 65 watt TDP either. They wanted like a middle ground that was probably closer to PBO. It's a weird one, but ultimately, AMD chose the 65 watt TDP for a reason. It does deliver the majority of the performance that those parts can deliver normally, and puts them into a slightly more favorable state for power efficiency. Because obviously the gains you get from going to 105 watts are not anywhere near the gain in power. So going from 65 watt to 105 watts is a pretty big jump. And even MSI, I think they're claiming like a 13% performance increase for Cinebench. Obviously, that's just one test, and that's kind of a best case scenario. So power efficiency isn't amazing.
It'll be a 13% performance bump for at least, I would have guessed, 60% more power. I'm just guessing here. I don't have the figures, but I know you could boost Cinebench scores with PBO, like max PBO, by about 20%. I think DeBauer showed that for about an 80% increase in power usage. So, and as you say, it's just not an optimal way to configure Zen 5, which was the exact same case with Zen 4. We got the 105 watt parts first, and they ran a bit hot, and we were a bit underwhelmed by their efficiency. But having said that, they were much better than the Intel CPUs of the time. And then we got the 65 watt parts. And I think I even said when we reviewed the 65 watt parts that this is what AMD should have led with. Like the 65 watt parts should have been it, because we're getting the same performance essentially, especially in games, while using less power, and then a lot less power for multi-core workloads for essentially, spitting distance to the 7700 was within spitting distance of the 7700X. It made so little difference, but it saved so much power. And they didn't hit that 95 watt TJ Max, which, AMD has said is a safe limit for 24/7 operation. So it's not the max limit, it's a safe limit. But 95 degrees scared a lot of people, and they thought back then they were attributing operating temperature with power consumption. And
which are
different things for sure.
So I mean, like we sort of talked about around Zen 5's release, AMD would have tested 65 watt and 105 watt internally at launch to know which one was the more optimal configuration. So it wasn't a mistake or something that they accidentally didn't make it 105 watt part and are now going back and having to fix that with a BIOS mode. It was a deliberate choice, and as you've mentioned, they did it for various different reasons. Another thing that I want to talk about is the Ryzen 5 7600X3D, which has been officially launched, I think this week, or at least in the last couple of days. It is an exclusive to certain retailers in certain regions. So in the United States, for example, it is a Micro Center exclusive. So as we've seen with previous parts that come out like this, it is an exclusive processor. I believe it's priced at $300 US at Micro Center. So let me just check. I believe it's about that. And then
so
it's also about.
Is that $100 roughly less than a 7800X3D? Sorry to interrupt you, Tim.
Yeah, so I think the MSRP of the 7800X3D is $450, but it has since come down a bit from that. So it's no longer priced at $450. As I mentioned, it's also exclusive to Mind Factory in Germany. So it's not just a US regional exclusive by the looks of things, but it will be coming to various different retailers, but not a wide launch. So, availability on Newegg doesn't appear to be a thing really. But if you do have a specific retailer in your region, it may offer the 7600 XTD. It's 329 euros at Mind Factory. So again, it is a discount over the 7800 XTD, which I believe was 500 euros at launch. So it's a fair bit cheaper, but obviously you're getting a cut down in core count from 8 to 6, and that has some impact in performance and those sorts of things. So
yeah, I was just updating my pricing because I was completely. How much is the 7800 X3D selling for at the moment? I'm struggling to find accurate pricing information in the US on it. So
I believe it was around mid 300s maybe,
that's
but
what I thought, but I'm seeing it higher than that now. But hang on, let me just.
yeah, it's a pretty popular part. So maybe it's like gotten sold out sort of issues at the moment. Yeah, it's up to, is it like $600 or something on?
Well, it's 400. Okay, yeah. It's 300. It's $400 at Newegg. It is out of
Right.
stock.
Right. Yep.
B&H have it for 420. So you're looking at $400. And
That sounds about right.
Did you say the 6-core one's $300?
I believe so.
I couldn't actually find it on Micro Center. I'm doing a bad job of price checking right now on the fly.
Yeah, I mean, I've looked at this PC Gamer article, and they were suggesting that it is $299.
Okay, so it's about a 25% discount if the 7800 X3D was in stock. So that makes it pretty good value for gaming, or for gamers, which is what you would be buying it for, right? Because I've technically already reviewed the 7600 X3D when I did 7950 X3D versus 7900 X3D versus 7800 X3D video.
Oh, yeah.
As a bit of a bonus, I included a simulated 7600 X3D.
Yeah.
And I found it was about 10% slower than the 7800 X3D on average across the 12 games tested, making it about 14% faster than the 7700X and about 18% faster than the 7600X. So if it's 10% slower and it's 25% cheaper, pretty great deal for those who have access to it, which isn't us. I'm not going to bother buying one in like I did for the 5600 X3D because that content wasn't super popular because it is an exclusive and most people can't buy it. Though this does appear to be probably a better deal upon release than that part was.
Yeah. Well, I was just looking at historic pricing for the 7800 X3D, and for a period between about late April to the start of July, you were able to get the 7800 X3D for around $350. That seemed to be a pretty consistent price. So, and even as far back as March, there were the occasional sales below $370-ish. So that's looking across the last sort of year of pricing. So there's been the occasional deals around that sort of price, and then more recently, so post July, which has been sort of in the lead up to Zen 5, the price has actually gone up. So there's been a brief period where you've been able to get it at Newegg for about $370, but more typically it's crept up to the $400 mark. So I guess relative to pricing from a few months ago, there's probably about a $50 difference going down to the 7600 X3D, but obviously at the moment it could be as much as $100 discount. So that will change those discussions a bit.
$100 discount, definitely get the 7600 X3D if you're looking for sort of top tier gaming performance on a budget. $50 difference, you can go either way. I mean, technically speaking, that would make the 7600 X3D slightly better value based on our 12 game average, but much the same. That's sort of a break even situation. So you could really go either way there, depending on how significant the $50 is. I'd probably opt to getting the 8-core model because I imagine over time you'll start to see that negative 10% margin widen a bit, or at least, the 700 X3D be a plus, but you know what I mean. So anyway, haven't got too much to say on that one. It's disappointing that it's a Micro Center exclusive, but there will be very limited supply of those because that's just how those binned parts work. AMD aren't going to sell you perfectly fine silicon for $50 to $100 US less if they don't have to, especially if the 7800 X3D, which is a high demand part, is out of stock. But that might be, they might be trying to minimize how many of those they have in the wild leading up to the Zen 5 X3D parts. Not sure. Maybe they're trying to manage that a bit better.
Yeah, not sure. I mean, a lot of Zen 4 parts have been pretty heavily discounted, so I'm not sure whether they're trying to move that stock out while trying to keep the 7800 XG as like their premium offering. So making that the sort of, hey, if you want that one, you're going to have to pay up for that. But, we'd rather you buy Zen 5 over Zen 4. So we'll try and push out the stock of things like 7600s and 7700Xs and whatnot out as quickly as possible. Not sure what's happening there, but yeah, as you say, like it's a bin processor. They've done many of these in the past where they do very limited runs. I think it's kind of in some ways better to only make it a limited release if you can't have significant stock of it, because there were a few launches back in the Zen 2 days, I think it was, with the Ryzen 3000 series. They released like Ryzen 3 CPUs that were meant to be widely available.
I think it was the 3100 and the 3300X.
Yeah, they pumped those out. Very cheap quad core options around that sort of $100 US mark. And then there was just it was one release and done, basically. Yeah, they had a bit of stock of them, released them out into the wild worldwide, and then, there was just no more bin silicon to be produced into those parts from that point. So we've seen with some of these other options, like the 5600 XUD and so on, that supply's been a little more consistent, but just more limited, if you know what I mean. Like, you could have gone to Micro Center for a lot longer period and bought a 5600 XUD, but if you lived here in Australia, for example, you just couldn't get one. So, it's probably better than getting people's hopes up of like this new value CPU that they know they're only going to make a certain amount of and not be able to fulfill demand worldwide for it. Just, they've got some bin silicon, release it somehow out into the wild, and then, get a few sales. But the main focus obviously is on the parts that the mainstays in the lineup. So, I guess that pretty much does it for our normal news topics, and we'll look at various different things that have been going on. Let's take a break. We'll come back and, we'll get into boring lifetime. All right, Steve, we're back. It's your turn to talk about what's been happening in your boring life. And
mate,
outside of Windows, what's happened?
My life has been so exciting over the last week. So I know I've let this segment down for the last few weeks, but I have insane news, fantastic news. The power went out for 2.5 days, Tim.
Oh,
so that
generator time.
So exciting for me. We've had for the last 2 weeks, for any listeners who live in Victoria will know, pretty horrific weather. So we've had extremely high winds that have they've not gone away, have they, Tim? They've just been consistent, strong,
it's been pretty relentless.
Terrible weather.
My little weather station was telling me that we had the windiest day of the year just a couple of days ago, and it was significantly windier than a lot of the other days. So
it's been bad. So I think after a week and a half, and for those who, well, I guess we'll get to the generator, but for those who don't know what I'm waffling on about, basically every time the wind it's windy enough to, I don't know, make your hair move, Tim, my power goes out. So just a gentle light breeze and I lose power. So it's been a problem for a while. It's kind of annoying because we do need power to do what we do. And not only do I lose power, we lose all forms of communication because our local tower goes down because it only has UPS battery backup for 3 hours. And when that goes down, I know it's 2024, it's hard to believe, but when that goes down, and like I only live, an hour and a half from the city, from the CBD. So it's not
of
like
Melbourne,
Yeah, like you always give me crap for living out in the sticks, which is sort of true, but at the same time, I guess it depends on where you live in the world, because an hour and a half from the city could be like a shuttle, a trip to the moon. But I don't consider an hour and a half outside of the city.
Yeah, Europeans are like, that's a different country.
Yeah, well, that's sort of what I was getting at.
Basically, you're saying a leaf lands on the electrical wires and your power, it just trips everything.
It's all over. So we need power. We lose power, we lose communications a whole lot, so it's bad. So about a year ago, I spent a significant sum of money on a diesel generator that is fully automated, powers the entire property, everything. Apart from having to put fuel in it, it takes care of the rest. Now, for those of you that are yelling about batteries and all that other stuff, we've talked about that in previous podcast, so don't want to go down that rabbit hole. But the point is, I got this generator. We've had a couple of like power outages for an hour, half an hour. Doesn't really justify the investment that I've made in this thing. So when the wind started picking up to extreme levels, I thought, oh, okay, any second now, that thing, the power's going out, the generator's kicking in, it's going to save the day. Balin and I sat in here testing Star Wars, Outlaws, and all this stuff. And when I say the wind was blowing, like it was howling.
It was pretty insane.
Like there was people were losing verandas, parts of their houses. You know, we had big, huge gum trees that are like 3-4 foot around. They just bent right over. There's stuff going everywhere. Roads are shut down. No power outage. Nothing. It's like a week and a half of this, and I haven't lost power for a second. Could not believe it. Anyway, right towards the end of this crazy weather, I woke up at 2:30, and it sounded like there was a locomotive outside. It's not loud, this generator, but it's that deep, rumble.
Yeah.
It's like, and so I wake up and just hearing, I'm like, what the hell is going on? And then sure enough, the generator kicked in at 2:30 and everyone's lost power. The entire area, the estate is just pitch black except for our place. So that lasted 2.5 days, and the NBN went down. So I've got 2 NBN plans at the house and office, both of them dead within 3 hours. Starlink worked like a champ, was able to download the games that we were testing at the time to do this Windows testing and all that sort of stuff. And thing works flawlessly. Basically, you couldn't tell we were off grid at that point. But yeah, everything worked well. Hot showers, the whole lot. So
nice.
it was really good. So stoked with that.
And what was the damage as far as like trees and stuff? Because I remember you had a couple of years back a bunch of trees getting effed up by...
Yeah. So I've got a 5-acre property with hundreds upon hundreds of trees, and we've put a lot of time and effort into it. We only fully lost 3 trees this time, which is essentially nothing for us. There was one tree that I really liked that I've featured in our BTS content before. But anyway, you have to be a Harbour Box member for that, so I won't go into details. But there's one tree I really liked and I lost that, so I was a bit sad about that. But other than that, considering how insane the weather has been for the last 2 weeks, very minimal damage. So consider myself very lucky on that one. We've already cleaned up the trees and the branches. It was more just, branches and stuff everywhere. But the fact that it hadn't knocked over many trees or just about any was really good. So yeah, that's sort of been exciting for me. But even before the power went out, I was saying to Balin, it's like, I don't know, it's not really a good term, but it's almost like a nuclear deterrent, like for me mentally. Like it's like I'd rather have it and not need it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But it was great doing the Star Wars Outlaws testing because I spent, I think it was 2.5-3 days basically in the office almost full time, like 18-hour days, just running the benchmark pass over and over again. And I just thought, God, imagine if we lost power now and I had to, try and make do with the dinky generator or something and try and get all this work done. And admittedly, Star Wars Outlaws, it was a bit of a flop in the end, and we weren't that sort of stressed about getting it out. But it could have been Zen 5 or a major product release. And there's nothing more devastating than putting all that time and work into a major product release, being really excited about the content, and then maybe you're in the encoding stages or the editing stages and you keep losing power. Nightmare. So the fact that we know that thing just takes care of that is great. And I know I've waffled about this for way too long, but those Blue Eddy, again, not sponsored, paid for them with my own money, bought them through Bunnings, mind you. Those Blue Eddy power stations with the UPS function, perfect. So obviously the power went off at 2:30 in the morning, but we had the editing PC on and stuff and no power loss there. And then when the power came back on, the ATS, which is like the automatic transfer switch, detects mains power. It monitors, it does all this sort of fancy stuff, and then eventually switches back over. So you lose power for about 10 seconds. And while we were doing that, we were encoding a video because we don't know when the power's coming back, right? So encoding a video, the Threadripper system sucking down like 700 watts encoding this video, power goes out. It just keeps encoding, mains power comes back on, And yeah, they work a treat, those power stations. So I'm really wrapped with those as well. And they're really cost effective. So it was like $1,200 Aussie for the AC 180, I believe it is what we have on my PC and Balin's PC. It's like a 20 millisecond switching frequency, but we've not had problems with them. So they're much slower than a high performance UPS, but they do the proper sine wave and all that stuff and seem to work well. So other than losing power and that, you can't top that, Tim. You can't. There's no weather station or sprinkler talk or mowing of lawns that can come close to losing power for 2.5 days. That's peak excitement where I come from.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be pretty upset if I lost power for 2.5 days because I do not have a diesel generator. That said, my power is certainly much more reliable and don't think we had any power outages while...
There's no trees where you are. It's just like a desert.
Yeah, it's more of a plains. It's farmland, that sort of thing. They're growing crops and whatnot, so there's not as many trees to hit power lines, and I live much closer to major cities and those sorts of things. So, yeah, much less likely to be affected by that sort of thing. But yeah, I didn't have too many trees fall out. I think I had one tree that was like at a 45-degree angle, but hadn't fully like just snapped in half. So
got finished off, did it?
Nah, fixed that, brought it back up to upright.
Okay,
and
nice.
Well, I was making sure, I wanted to make sure that it wasn't like snapped because it was 45 degrees at the base, like the ground had gotten so wet and stuff.
Yep.
So I wanted to make sure it wasn't like snapped off at the roots, but it wasn't. So spent a bit of time bringing that back upright and staking it in so that it hopefully will survive a bit longer. But I was expecting, like many more trees and branches and stuff just everywhere. I had a few trees that had snapped in half from much less wind previously, like probably earlier this year. But yeah, not as much stuff this time. So that was good. And yeah, I was especially happy that my fruit trees and stuff didn't get affected at all because they're currently flowering, ready to make some delicious fruits for me. So
love that.
If they'd gotten screwed up by wind, I'd be pretty upset. But those all survived pretty okay. We also got a hailstorm here that basically turned the ground into snow. So that was interesting for a bit.
Yeah, we had that as well.
Just mountains of hail outside. So yeah, it was interesting. Pretty crazy weather, and we had one of the warmest Augusts, I think, on record as well. Very warm for this time of year, which is, I guess, climate change related. So that's unfortunate. But yeah, we're heading into sort of the better weather for us here in Australia in the next couple of months, which I'm looking forward to. Get out and do a bit of gardening and things like that. Use a few things. So that'll be nice. As well, I've been doing some inside things, not related to, because to be honest, if it's 70-kilometer-an-hour winds, I'm probably not going to be outside too much doing stuff. So I've watched a couple of movies, and I think the highlight movie-wise that I watched The Batman from a couple of years ago, the DC movie from, I think, Matt Reeves, which I hadn't seen. I'm a Batman fan. I liked the Christopher Nolan trilogy back in the day, not that long ago, I guess, because there were even Batman movies before then. And so I've been pretty disappointed with a lot of like DC movies over the last decade. So I've kind of, you see a new one, kind of like Marvel, I guess. You see a new one, you're like, nah, I'll get around to that at some point in the future. Decided to watch The Batman, and I thought it was really good, probably much better than most of the other DC crap that's been pushed out. I guess it's not a DC universe film, so maybe that helps a bit. But yeah, probably one of the better superhero films. Like, I would definitely prefer to watch like The Batman over the majority of recent Marvel stuff. It's actually a well-made movie with a good story.
Yep.
Visually impressive. That sort of. Have you seen it?
Yeah. It's good. Yeah, really good.
That sort of made me excited for, there's a Penguin TV series that is coming out on HBO, I believe, in a couple of weeks from today. So that stars the same actor who played the Penguin in the Batman movie.
Oh, so Colin Farrell will be doing it. He was awesome. Yep. Okay.
So yeah, there's sort of a spin-off TV series based on that film coming out soon. So, which I actually had no idea. It's not like I watched the film in anticipation of that TV series or anything. I watched it, and then turns out they're making this spin-off series.
Okay.
So I'm interested to see that when it comes out. And then there's a sequel to The Batman as well, coming in a couple of years from now, I believe. So yeah, keen to check that out. I thought it was, pretty decent. And yeah, we'll see what the DC Universe reboot does and whether they do their own sort of, in-universe Batman versus out-of-universe Batman. Very confusing, but yeah, I'm certainly pumped to see what that side of the out of universe things can do, because yeah, it's sort of better than the Marvel stuff lately. So
Sorry, if you're done with that one, I was just saying, because I love to torture myself,
yeah.
while I was updating and waiting for games to download, admittedly I paused it about 400 times, but trust me, it did not. I watched the Borderlands movie, and
Oh, I've heard it's really bad.
well, yeah, no kidding. And I thought, is it really that bad though? Like, is it as bad? Yeah, no, they're not lying. Holy moly, it's it's not good. So anyway, I don't recommend that one. I definitely didn't give it my full attention, so
But it probably doesn't deserve it. I mean, it's kind of like if it's not, you're watching and you're like, oh, this kind of sucks. Like, why am I bothering to pay attention? If it's not deserving your attention, then it's
yeah,
whatever, right?
I had it and I thought, I'm gonna check it out, and yeah, no, not good. So probably all we need to say on that one. Could have been cool, could have been good, but no, they decided not to go that way. So
Yeah, disappointing. I'm a big Borderlands fan. I've quite liked the games over the years. I think I've played pretty much all of them. Really like them, generally speaking. Probably the early ones are a bit better than the more recent ones. And then when you hear about a movie coming out, you're like, oh.
Well, also, I'm a big Jack Black fan. Like,
yeah,
love
he's
him.
generally
He's
pretty
awesome.
good in things.
So good. And yeah, Claptrap was the worst. Like, yeah. I found it hard to believe that it could be as annoying and as bad as people were making out. The people were not wrong. So.
I mean, in some of the games, at times, some of the characters can get pretty annoying, especially in Borderlands 3. There's a lot of pretty annoying dialogue in that game. But, it's a movie. It's 2 hours. You don't have to write hours upon hours of dialogue that is repeated over the course of a 40-hour game. It's like, it's just 2 hours. You can write some good stuff in there, but yeah, like a lot of game movies have been pretty underwhelming over the years. I'm thinking back to like Assassin's Creed. They made a movie about that. That was crap. There was like a Hitman movie as well. I'm a big fan of the Hitman games. That was crap.
Yeah, but that I could be misremembering, let's say. But I don't remember the Hitman movie being that bad. Like, it was pretty watchable. Again, I don't know if I gave it my full attention, but I remember it being okay. Like, I don't even know what that got in terms of.
I thought it was pretty forgettable, so I probably can't remember any specifics about it.
Yeah, I don't. What year was it? Because there's a few.
Oh, it was ages ago.
Yeah, there's a few different ones that come up here. Anyway, I remember it wasn't great. It certainly wasn't great, but
2007.
Yeah, I think if you watched it and then Borderlands, you'd be like, the Hitman movie was awesome, but I could be wrong on that.
Yeah, I mean, there's been some, like, I thought the Mario movie was perfectly fine. Like, again, it wasn't like...
I didn't love that, but I didn't hate it.
Yeah, I wasn't, like, blown away. I wasn't like, oh, that's a rewatch for sure. It was fine, like, and reasonable. I think that... I'm sure that there was a better video game movie that I've seen recently. I just can't remember what it was, but it wasn't in that tier. It was like definitely a very good, maybe I think a TV series like Fallout or The Last of Us, which were very good.
Yeah, I'm not even sure if I remember the Hitman movie, to be perfectly honest. It does have a 17% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, but it's got a 6.2 on IMDb. Anyway, needless to say, probably not a banger, but could be very good relative to Borderlands. Which, I'm setting a low bar here, I know.
I mean, I'm kind of interested in watching the Borderlands movie just from the perspective of how bad is it? Like, kind of like right? Like,
that's exactly why I watched it. Yeah. I had to see it for myself. Yeah.
Yep. So anyway, I'm not going to watch it. I mean, I'm not going to watch it anytime soon. It's kind of like The Acolyte. You know when you ragged on The Acolyte like a few podcasts ago? I still haven't watched it. I still haven't watched it. I'm not interested. I've got other things to watch. Put that on the back burner.
I think you'd be less critical of The Acolyte than a lot of people because there's a lot of things that you're willing to overlook. I think with the Star Wars stuff, just to sort of enjoy a Star Wars TV series, I think you would be one of the least harsh critics of it, and I still think you would hate it. So I'm intrigued. I kind of want you to watch it because I know you're very. I don't know how to describe. your opinion on this stuff, but like you're very into the Star Wars. You love it, but you're not. It doesn't have to be. I don't know what's the word. Like they can sort of mess with it a bit, and you're okay with it. Like it can be a bit dumb or not fully make sense, and you're like, yeah, okay, but overall it was all right. I don't know if
Yeah,
you're
like
more lenient with that stuff.
I tend to, when it comes to like movies and TV shows and stuff, it's pretty rare for me to like hate something.
Mhm.
Like it's, for me, it's either like very good or it's just like totally forgettable. Like I
Mhm.
think like a lot of Star Wars fans, you know, when the Book of Boba Fett came out, which is a show I have seen, so I guess I can talk about it. Like I didn't like the show. Like I thought it was a bad show, but it doesn't extend for me any beyond that. Like I'm not going to post a review or post comments online about it. It's very much just, oh, that was kind of bad, and I'm just going to forget about it now, like put it out of my mind and just focus on like the good Star Wars stuff.
I think
Whereas people who are like very into the fandom will be like, oh, but that was so bad. Like it ruined Star Wars. Like it made other Star Wars things worse by its existence. Like it ruined the Boba Fett character from Empire Strikes Back. And to be fair, if you watch Empire, he's not actually in it that much. He's a cool character, I guess, based on the fact that he doesn't do very much. He just kind of stands around and looks cool, which I guess, you know, making a backstory that sucks.
In that one though, and like in the TV series, it's like, oh, okay, it's kind of like you gave Dad some armor and we'll like do a thing. so it wasn't like he wasn't sort of an elite. Anyway, yeah, I know, but
I kind of just forget it. Like I see it, I'm like, oh, that was kind of crap, but like I'll still focus on like the good Boba Fett from Empire, basically.
For me, that was more under the category of just disappointing.
Yeah.
It was, but the Acolyte, I can see why people took that one more personally, because it's so bad it's insulting. I don't know. Anyway, I'd love you to watch the Acolyte so I could.
Yeah. I think it also would depend on like your financial investment as well. Like if you're just paying for a streaming service, it's pretty cheap. But if I was like buying a Blu-ray box set of these shows and it's costing me like $100 or something, and then I'm watching, I'm like, oh, what is this garbage? Or if I was paying for like a really expensive, you know, Foxtel cable subscription or something, and that was the thing I wanted to watch, and it was just the biggest pile of garbage, which I guess is probably why there's games I think that I've probably hated more, is because there's more, you know, if I pay $100 for something I'm really hyped for it and then it's like actual garbage, then I'll be much more upset about that.
Well,
but, yeah.
I think that's what you were saying with Star Wars Outlaws, right? Because you played the game, I think, briefly is fair to say, but you spent a lot of time testing quality settings and investigating the visual aspect of the game.
Yeah, I haven't played heaps of it from a story or gameplay perspective. Like I used your save that was in the open world area and played a few different missions and things just to get, you know, gameplay footage or captures or whatever. But I didn't dive too much into what the game is actually like. As a reviewer would play.
It's not the sort of game I would play, obviously, being first and foremost that's a single player game, so that already sort of rules me out from getting super into it. But I played it. I didn't hate it as much, but then as a lot of people seem to, but then I didn't play a whole lot of it. But I thought visually the game was good. Look, the animations and some of the character,
the facial animations are bad.
Stuff
like, they're outdated.
I think I said that to you straight away, that is sort of a disconnect from the world, you know, and the scenes and stuff like that, which in the game are quite good. Yeah, the lot of the character animations seem broken, and I think what really lets the game down is just how bad the AI is. Like it
seems easy as the game goes.
Yeah, the game wasn't very engaging in that sense. It felt like a very old game in terms of how like the NPCs reacted within the world and what they could do. And the game itself isn't that interactive. Like, and I think that's what disconnects you from the playing experience, which is probably what upset a lot of people amongst, you know, all the other issues. Like, you know, there's so many dumb things about that game, like the fact that you just continually drop weapons. The game is built around weapons and blasters and stuff.
Yeah, I noticed that. I'm like, what's going on with that?
Yeah, I thought it was a bug at first when she kept dropping. Like, I'd find a new blaster. I'm like, oh, this is way better. This is making this a lot quicker to cut down these enemies. And then 2 seconds, I'm like, where'd that thing go? So that was weird. And And the fact that, you couldn't, again, like you couldn't shoot, like if there was a rat, you couldn't shoot it like, I think it was, there's so many games we've been able to shoot like chickens and things that run around. And I'm not saying that's necessarily something you want to spend your time doing, but it's kind of makes it feel real or more interactive when you do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I found quite a few graphical glitches as well. And I think, the reason I'm talking about this to circle back is the fact that I paid $135, I think it was, for the early access. So not
it's
cheap.
pretty expensive.
Not cheap. You expect a pretty great experience for that money, and I can see why people were annoyed. If the game was $40 and you got what you got, it's like, sort of shut up. Like it's the same thing with like a game like Fortnite, for example. I know there's the whole battle pass and all that stuff, but it's a pretty amazing quality game given how well it works and what you can do in it and all the creative modes and stuff. And then the fact that it's just the rate at which it's updated and the quality of the updates are pretty mind-blowing. Obviously they found a model there that makes them plenty of money, so it's makes financial sense to invest what they do invest in it. But the fact that you can create an account now, jump in that game and play it, I think that's becoming a bigger and bigger problem for a lot of these AAA titles. Like, how do you convince someone to part with what is effectively $100+ Australian dollars to play the game? I think No Man's Sky is another example where they've really put a lot of effort into. Well, they restored the game a long time ago, really.
But
the
content
backlash.
updates and stuff.
But the content, all the free content updates have been amazing. And it's hard to build a franchise now without doing that.
Yeah, I think it's less of an issue if you just make a good game. Like, I think people are willing to pay that sort of price for a really good single-player game. And a title like Black Myth Wukong, for example, has no issue selling millions of copies. And Baldur's Gate 3, I think that's a game that's basically never been discounted. It's pretty much been full price since its release. And there's many examples of single-player games like that. I think for multiplayer games, it's more problematic because if you're a multiplayer game and you're trying to charge a premium price point, you are competing against all the other free-to-play or virtually free-to-play games like Fortnite or things where there's battle passes that are reasonable into, they're not like a $70 or $100.
Yeah, the battle passes
they're optional.
Generally speaking, they're optional.
Yeah,
so
we've seen
what you're
games
saying is don't make a shit single player game and you can have success. Yeah,
that's true. I think there's fairly average games that have been successful as well. So it's not 100% it needs to be successful, but you need to at least make people interested in playing it. And I think with Star Wars Outlaws, there's kind of two groups of criticism with it. There's kind of the fair and unfair stuff. I feel like Star Wars Outlaws did suffer from a lot of unfair criticism. So, for example, I saw lots of comments about how bad the visuals look, which I think is generally unfair to the game outside of things like the facial animations and facial capture, which is bad. Like, that is outdated. The rest of the game, in my opinion, I think looks great. I think one of the issues that I noticed with the game is that I think why people think it looks bad is that film grain is enabled by default. And so when you capture it and you're trying to share gameplay or preview clips or anything to places like YouTube or even worse, Twitter or one of those platforms that heavily compresses the footage, film grain destroys visual quality on streaming services. It is awful for that. And it will make everything look flat and muddy and gross because it's just film grain. They try and delete it from the compression. So I think that has hurt a lot of the footage that people have seen of Star Wars Outlaws. It actually looks a lot better if you play the game itself, whereas a lot of the footage, it doesn't look very good. I think that's because film grain is enabled by default, which I guess is probably a mistake the developers made. They didn't realize that would impact the perception of those sorts of things. And there's a lot of just like garbage, hot take Twitter commenting stuff about the game. No. But I think, it's weird. It seems to happen for some games and not for other games. Like, for example, I think a game like Black Myth Wukong is generally pretty good, but there are issues with that game as well in terms of some of the aspects to it. So, yeah, it just blows up for some titles versus others. But I think, the things around combat, the AI, some of the stealth-related things, I think that is all pretty fair criticism of the game. Apparently, now I haven't played enough of the game. I do want to play it to see what it's like further into the game. People that have played more of it say that the later parts, the first part of the game especially, is quite bad, and that later it improves in terms of its story and setting and things like that. I'll take your word for it. It's probably not probably not a great business move to create a game that is so underwhelming at the start, which is when people are trying to like
you kind of want to
play
good
it and
at
not
the
refund
start,
it.
but then if it continues to get better, that's amazing. Like you don't want it to be amazing at the start and then just become repetitive and boring, and after an hour you're over it. So,
I think it's a balance there. You don't want that point to be so late into the game that you've already refunded it. And so, if Star Wars Outlaws, people are saying that it gets good, 10 hours in, probably too late. But you don't want it to be amazing to begin with and then just like a slow crawl to crap or unfinished or whatever. I think as well, the game was hurt by it being a Ubisoft title. Ubisoft and EA have such a bad reputation that gamers automatically go in assuming the game will be bad. This is not something that I personally do. I tend to give every game
EA sucks.
A chance on its own. I think
EA sucks.
I think the companies are bad. Like, there's no doubt that EA and Ubisoft are pretty underwhelming bad companies.
Worst. Can't stand EA. They're bad.
Yeah, I think it's a bad company, but Star Wars Jedi Survivor was a pretty good game, and what was the one before that? I thought those were pretty good. So I like to give each game, a chance to survive on its own merits to see whether, can they improve? Can they make things better? But if it's like they make it a dud or it's bad, then it's like, that's probably EA or Ubisoft's fault. So that's obviously an issue for Ubisoft. They're going to have to improve their reputation by making really good games and sort of, getting around that sort of perception that people have of their company. Star Wars, what was it? Star Wars Outlaws, probably not the game to fix their reputation. It will take some sort of bigger effort or bigger game to do that. But I think EA is, as bad as they are, there was a period where they were very bad and making awful games, just like garbage, microtransaction filled, just real piss takes of games. I feel like in the last couple of years, they've tried to improve that. The Star Wars Jedi games, the Dead Space remake, those sorts of games have been a small uptick, but it hasn't, fixed their reputation as a company. They're still EA. They're still doing some pretty underwhelming stuff.
Yep, I still think they suck. So,
fair enough.
That's all I've got to say on that one, Tim.
Is EA still the company that does you can't use the game for more than 5 GPUs?
They still do that. Yeah, for 24 hours. And, if you buy the game on Steam or whatever, you've still got to go through their crappy app. Ubisoft does that as well, which is really annoying.
EA has said that for Dragon Age the Veilguard that they will not require you to use their app.
Well,
so you'd just be able to launch it from Steam, probably because people have hated on it so much.
Yeah, that could be the first EA game that's not complete and utter trash. So looking forward to that. See if they can pull it off.
We'll see how it goes. But
There's a lot riding on that one, Tim.
I don't know. I don't think Dragon Age looks like, I've played the previous Dragon Age games. Not convinced that the new one looks any good. We'll see.
Okay.
But EA and Ubisoft requiring all those launches and stuff is pretty crap. So there's certainly that reason to hate on them. The fact that you can't get Outlaws on Steam is just idiotic, in my opinion. So, there's those issues. But anyway, I think that's probably done for this podcast, unless you've got anything else to chat about.
No. No, I don't want to start another Zen 5 discussion or anything like that. Yeah. Maybe we can talk about that a bit next time because it's kind of interesting. Again, I'm not going to start the conversation, Tim. I'm just going to say it's interesting seeing how things have gone and how things have developed with what the real Zen 5 performance uplift is in games and the whole narrative that AMD tried to push with the admin mode, that somehow that made Zen 5 better than Zen 4. And then we got the update and all that, which is ultimately why we did all of this bloody Windows testing in the first place, was to see if there was Zen 5 optimizations that improved Zen 5's game performance, which so far doesn't appear to be a thing. But anyway, that could be something to review and revisit in a future podcast and look back on it all and see how it's played out.
Yeah, we'll see how that goes. more and more testing over the next couple of weeks and months. And
Mhm.
yeah, I'm sure you'll be getting into what's the next Arrow Lake? That's supposed to be coming out in
Yeah,
October.
that's
So
real soon. Yeah, I'm pretty excited for that. So hopefully that's not a letdown because that
yeah,
could be awesome.
it should be interesting at the very least to see what, a fairly substantial architecture overhaul and new platform and things will bring. So I'm pretty keen
Mhm,
on that.
mhm.
But yeah, we should be back next week for the podcast as usual. Just talking about whatever's come up that week, whatever we feel like. So yeah, we will be back. As always, we've got our Hardware Unboxed podcast YouTube feed if you want to see the video version or the audio version. There's no real visual element to these podcasts. So if you do just want the audio feed, you're getting pretty much the exact same experience, and that is available in all your podcast apps and those sorts of things. Yeah, that'll do it for this week. Thanks everyone for listening or watching, and we'll see you in the next one.